the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for being here. Just by way of introduction again, my name is Laura Adams. Along with me is Mr. Jonathan Borst. And also we are going to be assisted from time to time through this trial by a law intern, a law student who's interning at the State Attorney's Office, and his name is Juan Ramirez. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a case about responsibility and accountability, or I should say, the lack of both on the part of the defendant in this case, George Pino. The evidence is going to show that on September the 4th of 2022, this defendant took his wife, his 17-year-old daughter, and 11 of her teenage friends out on his boat, and he wound up plowing right into a huge channel marker that ironically was placed in Biscayne Bay to keep boaters safe. As a result of his complete abandonment of good judgment and responsibility, 17-year-old Lucy Fernandez, her given name is Luciana Cristina Fernandez, is dead. In the aftermath of causing Lucy's death, this defendant avoided accountability by telling the police a fabrication of how this boating crash occurred. And he maintained that falsehood long after the day of this tragedy. The evidence in this case, ladies and gentlemen, will show you this was not a mere accident or a momentary lapse in judgment. The evidence that Lucy is dead because the defendant failed to do the most basic things that the rules of the water require. Things like maintaining a proper lookout. Things like operating your vessel at a safe speed for the conditions. Avoiding situations that can cause a collision, or as you may hear from time to time in this case, an allision. Collision technically means two boats striking each other. Allision is a boat striking a stationary object. Whatever term you want to use. Don't crash into things. Moreover, you are to travel when you're in a narrow channel on the right-hand side of the channel. We're not in England. We don't drive our cars on the left side, and we don't operate our boats on the left side of the channel. This defendant drove his boat after consuming alcoholic drinks that was full of teenagers who also had been drinking alcohol, right into that big steel channel marker in Biscayne Bay in broad daylight, a channel marker that had a day-glow green square above it with the number 15. A channel marker that he had passed by a multitude of times because this was his water playground, going to and from a location, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, up to a sandbar. He hit that channel marker, ladies and gentlemen, as he was accelerating through the channel, going from speeds of 43 miles an hour to 47 miles per hour. He struck that steel channel marker at just under 50 miles per hour. The witness who will tell you how this crash happened has no bias, no prejudice, and no sympathy. This witness has a perfect memory. And this witness is not swayed by money or privilege or power. That witness is Global Positioning System Data, better known as GPS. The GPS from the defendant's boat is how we know the way that this crash occurred, because the GPS told the truth about what happened. George Pino did not. But before I get into the details of the GPS analysis that was done in this case, I'd like to give you a little bit of an idea of what was happening on September 4th, 2022. The defendant, George Pino, and his wife, Cecilia, had planned a wonderful weekend celebration over the Labor Day weekend. Their younger daughter, who was also named Cecilia Pino, but went by Little Ceci, named after her mom, she was going to turn 18 later that week. And so the family invited a bunch of Little Ceci's friends to come to a location called Ocean Reef Resort to have a weekend of fun, hanging out together, going out on the boat, having a celebration dinner. At around 2:52 that Sunday afternoon, they got into George Pino's boat. 12 kids, the defendant, and his wife. Before leaving for Ocean Reef Resort, before leaving the resort, however, that boat was stocked with some food and drinks. And the drinks that were stocked on that boat were not just water, were not just sodas. There was alcohol, lots of it stocked on that boat. Now the plan was to head out Can you all see okay? The plan was to go from here, which is where the location of Ocean Reef is, where I'm circling this blue dot, and to traverse across this little narrow waterway, and then head up toward this location, which is called the Cutter Bank Channel. Now, for those that might not be boaters, what you'll learn in this case is that a channel is an area of the bay that's dredged out to be deep, because a lot of Biscayne Bay is relatively shallow. And if a large boat that has a keel under it has a draft that's too far, that boat's going to run aground, and that'll cause a danger to everyone. So in areas where the bay is shallow, there will be dredged out locations. And to keep people safe and to let boaters know where they can maneuver their maybe larger vessels, there are what's called channel markers on either side. They're big steel poles, and on one side of the channel there will be odd-numbered markers in day-glow green, and on the other side there will be even-number markers in red. The plan for that day was Mr. Pino went up through this channel, and he and other boats were going to rendezvous at this location here, which is called Billy's Point. It's a popular location where people will come to, dock their boats, tie their boats up to other boats, and people will socialize, have fun, sometimes drink alcohol, have food, listen to music, things of that nature. However, when they get to this area where I have the orange dot, Billy's Point, one of the boats that's kind of part of this group, it's too big to dock there. You can see where the water along here is, where this is like a lighter blue that shows shallower water. So what they do instead is they head up further north here to where I have this red dot. It's slightly deeper water, and that's where the defendant and several other boats basically stay for a few hours. Okay? So once they get to that part of the sandbar where the water is a little deeper, the plan was at the end of their time there, they were going to return back down to Ocean Reef because the defendant had planned a surprise party for his daughter. And it was going to be a catered dinner from like 9 p.m. to 11. To give you a little bit better of an idea of how the channel works, I have this exhibit also. And this gives you a little bit more of a close view of where the defendant was going to travel. So here we have where Ocean Reef is. Here is the area where he would traverse. And then this area here that I'm circling, that is called Cutter Bank. And there are channel markers, 15, 14, 13A. There's channel marker 12, all along this channel so that boats can safely travel through it. Okay? And I have one more that's just a little bit closer so you can really get an idea. of where those markers are through here. And all of this evidence you'll see during the trial. This isn't your only chance. When the defendant was traveling north to get up to where the sandbar was, he was traveling at a pretty moderate speed, maybe like in the 30s or so. Also, he was navigating the boat in a way that's consistent with seeing other vessels because, again, this is Labor Day weekend, and the waters are a little busier during holiday weekends than they are, during the business day. The defendant and the kids and his wife, all on his boat, get up to the area of the sandbar at about 3:23 that Sunday afternoon. Now let's talk a little bit about what was going on at the sandbar. There, Mr. Pino dropped his anchor, and the girls that were on his boat would, hang out with each other. There was another boat that was, the owner was friendly with Mr. Pino. He had some boys on his boat, so the girls and the boys were swimming back and forth with the boats, listening to music, having a great time. They would hang on to floating devices, interact with each other, and yeah, they were drinking. The teens on the boat, on Mr. Pino's boat, helped themselves to alcoholic drinks that the Pinos provided. The adults kind of knew what was going on, and the thought was, look, if kids are going to drink, it's better if they're drinking in the company of hopefully responsible adults rather than do something on their own. But the teenagers weren't the only ones that had consumed alcohol that afternoon. So did Mr. Pino. This was really one big happy party. Here's a picture of most of the girls that were there that afternoon. Many of these girls knew each other from elementary school. What a great day this would have been. Oh. This girl here, in the white bathing suit with the cute little flowers, that's Lucy. At one point that afternoon, Lucy's mom and dad, who were also at Ocean Reef, had been asked by their daughter, "Mom, Dad, come on out to the boat. We're going out with the Pinos. Come meet us out at the sandbar." Now, Lucy's dad, who you'll meet during this trial, he was kind of tired. He had golfed earlier in the day, but he and his wife figured, if your teenage kid is saying that she wants to see you, even when she's with a lot of her friends, let's suck it up, let's go. We're going to go see our daughter. And so Mr. and Mrs. Fernandez took their own boat out and wound up rendezvousing with where the Pino boat was and a couple of the other boats that were there. What you'll learn is that Mr. Fernandez didn't really want to stay a very long time because he had plans later that day to watch the game between FSU and LSU with his dad, who lived at Ocean Reef. So his plan was to go out there, see his daughter, engage with the people that they all knew, and then try to leave by around 5:30 or so that he could be back in time to clean off the boat, get cleaned up, and then go over to his dad's condo on Ocean Reef. While Mr. Fernandez is there, he too consumes some alcohol. He winds up toward the end of the day getting ready to leave. And as he and his wife are getting ready to leave, they kind of thought about what a great afternoon it had been. They were glad that they'd gone out to see their daughter. At one point, their daughter swims over to the boat, and she asks her dad for some sunscreen and a hair tie, to make a ponytail with her hair. She hugged her dad before jumping back off the boat, and that was the last time Andy Fernandez ever got to hug his Before leaving, Andy took this picture with his phone. You can see this is the defendant's boat. You see people floating around. You see people on the boat. What could have been more fun than being lucky enough to be out on the waters, to have a weekend at Ocean Reef with friends that you've known practically your whole life? What a magical day this could have been. Now, they were there at that sandbar for almost 3 hours. And the evidence is going to suggest that perhaps Mr. Pino overstayed the time that he wanted to be there. Why? Because when he starts getting the girls to rendezvous back onto his boat, 12 17-year-olds plus his wife and him, he leaves the area here, where they had been, and begins to traverse back down south, where he's going to traverse through Cutter Bank Channel to get back to Ocean Reef. Why? I told you about him having a party planned. This was the invoice for that party. It was to go from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. It was going to be a custom buffet with salads, mini burgers, chicken, all of this kind of stuff. It was an outdoor venue that was going to be catered, and it was supposed to be a great time. But, my goodness, yes, 12 teenage girls that are going to need to get showered, get their hair dried, get ready to go out for this event. Now, these girls were staying in a home that the Pinos had rented for that weekend. It wasn't like some gigantic mansion. So what winds up happening is, as he's heading back toward Ocean Reef, he is going faster than when he was going up there. And when he was going up to the sandbar, we know from the GPS that he was kind of circumnavigating things like this. What we know from the GPS is that when he was coming back, he was doing a lot more straight through traveling. Now, the waterways, of course, are different from the roadways. We don't have speed limit signs in the same way on the water that we have on land. But there are rules that are to be followed. Even if there is no speed limit, one of the rules is that you must operate your vessel at a safe speed for the conditions. I already talked with you about the fact that there's a rule you are to operate your vessel on the starboard or right-hand side of the channel. George Pino operated his boat on a plane, which means that it's basically just skimming the surface of the water. He's gotten so fast that the boat is just traveling on top of the water. He's operating it on the port side, meaning the left side of the channel, not the right. And as he was going through that channel, heading back to Ocean Reef, just as he had his GPS on the way up, his GPS was on the way back. The GPS on his boat tracked his every move, his direction, when he changed direction, and it tracked his speed. The GPS on his boat was like a silent witness, watching and recording his every move. So you'll learn in this trial a little bit about how GPS works. For now, I will just leave you with this. properly interpreting it, can tell you moment by moment where the boat is going, how fast it's going, and how long goes by from one time when you change direction to the next time you change direction. So what winds up on the way to, yes, this is the GPS data that we have from the defendant heading, before he leaves, heading up this way to where Elliott Key is, and then you see these little, like, track mark, these little blue dots, those are track marks. Those show every time the boat is being changed in direction. This is where he originally gets to, at Billy's Point, but it's too shallow for one of his friend's boats to be there. So he heads up, further north, until they get right here. Then, and he gets there at about 3:47. From there, the GPS is turned off because the boat's anchored. What do you need your GPS for? At 6:18, the GPS is fired back up again. And we know, track mark, he's navigating his way through here. And now look at what we see here. Straight lines, track mark, straight line, track mark, straight line. A very different driving pattern to get back than to get up there. So what do we know happens once he starts entering into Cutter Bank? We know that he is going straight down this way, right? There's a channel marker here, channel marker 14. Here is channel marker 15. This would be the channel, and he's hugging the left side of that channel. And what we know is that before he gets to channel marker 15, right, at 6:37 and 28 seconds, he has his last track mark. That's the last time he changed direction. And what did he do? He tried to avoid channel marker 15 right here. But it was too late. Let me back up a bit. So here we see the defendant's track lines heading up, and here he is coming back on the return track. And we see one track point here and one track point here, which is less than 30 feet away from where that channel marker is. And what we know is that when he leaves this track mark, he was going 43 miles per hour. This last track mark, right before he hits the channel marker, he's going 47 miles an hour. He's literally accelerating through that channel. What is this? All these little track marks here? This is after his boat crashes into the channel marker. Because he was not wearing a thing called a kill switch, which you attach like to your waistline or something, so that if you get ejected from the boat, it kills the engines so that nobody will get chopped up by a propeller. Thankfully, even though he was not wearing a kill switch, which is why we see the boat is still moving because the engines are still running, thank goodness nobody got chopped up in this case. To give you an idea of what it looks like for a 29-foot center console vessel to smash into a steel pole as fast as George Pino did, what you'll learn in this case is that we'll have to talk like sailors a little bit in this case, all right? So starboard and port, right and left. So this is the starboard side of his boat. And what happened is he initially hits with the front of the vessel right here called the bow. Boats, unlike cars, are not made of metal. They're made of fiberglass, which is plastic. And unlike metal that crunches and crashes, plastic flexes. So when he first hits that, the boat flexes. And what winds up happening is the boat rides up on the channel marker and literally is gouged open by the board that's at the top of that channel marker that says 15. And it rips the boat right open. When it comes to the other side of the channel marker, it's taking on water like crazy through this gigantic, gash mark in the boat. And as the boat is in the water and taking on all this water, it flips upside down. This is a picture of the vessel at final rest. You can see that huge gaping hole in the boat. Now, in the aftermath of this crash, it was chaos. The only person who was keeping a lookout for this vessel was the defendant. His wife, who was seated next to him in the center console, she was on her phone. And the kids were all thinking that George Pino's going to get them home safely. They're not keeping lookout for danger. This all came as a shock to them. It should not have been a shock to the defendant because the evidence will show that 9 seconds prior to impact, George Pino changed direction just 5 degrees to port, just a little nudge to the left side of that channel. And when he did that, he was on a complete collision course. An absolute collision course with where channel marker 15 is. For 9 seconds, from this moment, when you're out on the water, as you'll learn in this case, you can see that channel marker ahead of you, if you're looking. For 9 seconds, he never changes direction. He smashes right into it. And to give you an idea of how long that is, that's how long he was on a collision course with that gigantic steel pole. After the boat hits the channel marker, some girls are ejected from it, some girls jump off the boat, but there are now 14 people in that water. One by one, the girls who were not too badly injured try to seek out and find their friends. The defendant's wife, same. The defendant, though, he just kind of holds on to the front of his boat, which is now upside down, and the anchor of his boat has become the canopy, because the canopy of his boat is now on the bottom of Biscayne Bay. One by one, they're trying to account for all the girls. Where's Ceci? Where's Kati? Where's Mia? Where's Caro? All these girls. And eventually, through all that chaos, there are some that are not conscious. There are some that are borderline conscious. Everybody is accounted for, but one. They're looking and looking. Where's Lucy? Where's Lucy? Somebody yells to the defendant, still holding on to his boat. Look under the boat. Maybe she's trapped under there. She was. The injuries she sustained were not great injuries, but she didn't die from those injuries. She died because she drowned. She was underwater, unconscious, and she drowned. When Lucy's body is found, she's brought up onto a Good Samaritan boat. Because this was Labor Day weekend, there was a fair amount of vessel traffic out there. And without too much time going by one, Good Samaritans came and tried to help get all these people out of the water. When Lucy was brought on board, there were people on that little boat who started performing CPR on her. People start calling the police for fire rescue, for help. Now, it's tricky to give your exact location when you're on the water if you don't know how to give your coordinates, because it's not like you can look up and say, oh, I'm at the intersection of 12th Avenue and 14th Street. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer for first responders to get to the scene of a boat crash. Well, when the first responders get there, they know that Lucy is in dire shape. You'll hear that one officer, when he approaches, he's seeing a helicopter from above, which is trying to lower a paramedic onto the boat that Lucy's on. But the problem is the boat Lucy's on isn't very large, and the wash from the propellers is starting to make that boat spin. So he has to nudge his police boat up against the boat Lucy's on, and another officer has to do the same to keep the boat steady enough that it will be safe for the paramedic to come onto the boat. Once the paramedic is on the boat, they load Lucy up onto a backboard, and they transfer her to another boat. And then that boat takes off for this location here, Elliott Key, which is a long, really narrow island. And right about in the middle of it, there's a ranger station. And that's a place where it will be safe for a helicopter to land to then take Lucy to a hospital as fast as possible. Well, all along the way that they are trying to get her to Elliott Key, the officers are taking turns doing CPR on Lucy. The fire rescue guy is trying to intubate her. They're trying to get her heart pumping so that blood and oxygen will get to her brain. As you can imagine, a scene like this is pretty chaotic. The man who was tasked with the responsibility of managing this chaos is named William Thompson. He was, at the time, an investigator with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, better known as FWC. Since the time of this crash, he's been promoted, and he is now a lieutenant. Lieutenant Thompson was responsible for coordinating with all the different responders that came to this scene. Officers from the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Marine Patrol Unit. There were Coast Guard officials that came to the scene. There was other fire rescue units that came to the scene. There's the management of finding out who's injured, what's the level of injuries, conducting that kind of triage, figuring out what hospitals different people are going to go to. And beyond that, he also needed to find out what happened. How did this happen? The girls really couldn't give him any information. They're not paying attention, because what you'll learn is that on the bow of the defendant's boat, up in this area here, there was a girl sitting on every seat available. The defendant and his wife were sitting at the center console, and there were two girls that were seated in the back. These girls up front, their backs are to what's coming up ahead of them, and they're hanging out with each other, so they can't really tell what happened. And the defendant's wife was playing on her cell phone. So the only person that Lieutenant Thompson could try to find out how did this crash happen from was the defendant. Now, the defendant himself, for sure, got banged up. He had a cut to his head, a cut to his elbow. I think some of his teeth were, knocked around a bit. But overall, he was okay. He'd been checked out by police officers, fire rescue. He was ultimately transported to Elliott Key, which is where they brought all the other girls that were not tremendously injured. And there, Lieutenant Thompson winds up trying to find out from the defendant what happened. He could find out what happened from the defendant and from the GPS. And like I told you, the GPS told the truth, but he did not. When Lieutenant Thompson is interacting with the defendant, he's wearing what's known as a BWC, a body-worn camera. It's right on his chest. And while he's talking with the defendant at a picnic table that's there, the defendant is seated across from him. Now, you can't really see his face because it's like from chest to chest level, right? But you can hear what's being said. You'll hear the way that Lieutenant Thompson was speaking to the defendant in a calm way, just trying to find out what happened. Because at that point in time, there's no indication that this is a criminal case. They just need to figure out what the heck happened. So as they start talking, the defendant starts explaining himself. But the way he does it was an abdication of his responsibility and accountability, because the evidence in this case is going to show that what he said happened did not happen. What he did to avoid responsibility and accountability is he told this story to Lieutenant Thompson that there was this other vessel that had thrown a big wake in his way. And to keep his passengers safe, he had to try to attack through the wake, like taking evasive action. But we know from the GPS, which Lieutenant Thompson didn't have at that moment, he was on a straight course. I showed you. It was for 9 seconds straight ahead. There was no other boat. He made this up because he didn't want to be blamed for what was clearly his fault.
Judge will reserve a motion.
So, when Lieutenant Thompson asks, how did the crash happen? The defendant tells this story about what the evidence is going to suggest is a phantom boat. Now, clearly, nobody's going to be fully in charge of their rational faculties after a horrific event like this, whether it's your fault or not. This is a really stressful thing for anybody to go through. And he was injured. But he was alert. He was able to walk around. He was able to be responsive to questions. When the defendant told this story of the phantom vessel, he then was asked, would you give a written statement about what happened? This is what he wrote. Going back to ORC, Ocean Reef Club, through channel, pass boat on left side of my boat. Veer to the right to avoid big waves. Coming back into the wave, I lost control of steering wheel as boat was going through the big waves. I was ejected from the boat. That's what he said happened. He said it in more detail orally to Lieutenant Thompson, but that's what he wrote. And even when the GPS proved that he was wrong, he doubled down on the things he said to Lieutenant Thompson. Because in the aftermath of this crash, there was a lawsuit against the defendant. And you'll learn that in civil lawsuits, one of the things that happens is a civil attorney may say to the person that they're suing, tell us about how this crash happened. And that kind of a document is called an interrogatory. And when you answer an interrogatory, your answer has to be under oath through the penalties of perjury. And when he was asked in this interrogatory, how did this crash happen? You know what he said? What I said to Lieutenant Thompson, that's how the crash happened. How did the police wind up getting this GPS data? Well, in an effort to appear cooperative with the police, the defendant signs a form giving them consent to go on his boat and take from it the Simrad, that's the brand name of the chart plotter devices or the multifunctioning displays that he has. It's not completely unlike CarPlay, if anybody uses their Apple phone with their car, where you can scroll through different maps, charts, things like that. The defendant gives permission for that. And those Simrad navigational devices are then brought to a man who is, number one, a former FWC officer. Number two, is currently a lieutenant with the Town of Palm Beach Police Department as an internal affairs supervisor. But also, number three, is a maritime expert who testifies regularly in the field of safe navigation, safe boating requirements, and also in how to download and interpret GPS data. His name is Paul Albert, and you will hear from him about how GPS works, how he was able to extract GPS data from the defendant's boat, even after it had been upside down and underwater until they could salvage it and bring it back to shore. He will tell you unequivocally the defendant's boat took no evasive action to avoid striking that channel marker. There was no other boat in that vicinity. The defendant said that there was another boat, which is clearly disproven. He also told Lieutenant Thompson that he had 2 beers while he was out at that sandbar. Now, it would not be practical for you all as jurors to go out to the scene of this vessel crash and feel for yourself what it's like to go 47 miles an hour through that narrow channel on the wrong side of it. So Lieutenant Thompson and Mr. Albert did the best that they could to try to recreate it for any jurors that might be on this panel, whether you have experience boating or not. What they did was, using buoys and GPS points, they dropped one buoy in the Cutter Bank Channel where the second to last track point is, and one right before the last track mark, which is less than 30 feet away from where that channel marker is. They then had Lieutenant Thompson take his police vessel, which, like the defendant's, is 29 feet, has a center console, and has 2 300 horsepower engines. And what he did was he then began coming through the channel, and by the time he got to where that second to last track mark is, he was going 43 miles an hour. He then continues to accelerate his vessel until he's at 47 miles an hour, and at the last second, swerves to avoid hitting the channel marker. To give you an idea of what that's like, we had a veteran crime scene detective with the sheriff's office come out on a Marine Patrol boat and launch a drone that then could film the boat as Lieutenant Thompson piloted it through the channel. In addition, a GoPro camera was affixed to the front of Lieutenant Thompson's boat so that jurors could get an eye view of what you could see if you're looking and when you can see that channel marker up ahead. In addition, a GoPro camera was attached to the actual channel marker so that you could see that same approach as Lieutenant Thompson comes right up to it and avoids hitting it at the last second. Now, lest you think that the police did all of this without concerns for safety, you will learn that during this exercise, there were marked police boats on the north and south end of the channel to make sure no vessels were going to be in that area. Plus, we had the Marine Patrol boat that the detective had launched the drone from. Plus, as Lieutenant Thompson was going through this channel, he had his police lights activated. In addition to that, everyone that was on board his vessel for this exercise was wearing a life jacket, or what's called a PFD, a personal flotation device. When you see this footage, you will realize that traveling 45 miles an hour through waters, even when they're calm, is nothing like going 45 miles an hour in a car. Boats are not encased in steel like cars are. They're not equipped with anti-lock brakes. They don't have seat belts or airbags. One mistake on the water can cause absolute catastrophe. Oh, and also, before this exercise, Lieutenant Thompson did not consume 2 beers. Now, although we can't take you to the scene of where this horrible crash happened for safety reasons, because you can't predict what the weather's going to be like during a trial, you will be taken on a field trip to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Office, where they have a yard that they can store vessels that have been involved in crashes. And you will see with your own eyes this very boat. You will see the horrific damage, and you will be able to see for yourselves that anyone at the helm of that vessel, looking straight ahead, would easily be able to see a huge steel channel marker with a day-glow green board at the top of it. There's no evidence to conclusively prove that George Pino was drunk. He's not charged with boating under the influence, causing a death. There's no evidence that he deliberately crashed his boat into that channel marker. If the evidence supported that, he wouldn't be charged with manslaughter and vessel homicide. He'd be charged with murder. But the evidence does support a finding that traveling through that narrow channel at the speeds that he was, with as many people on his boat as he had, people who had been consuming alcohol, people who were 17 years old, and not looking where the heck he was going for 9 seconds. People won't even drive blindfolded for 9 seconds. They sure as heck should not be operating a boat with a blind eye. The evidence in this case will show conclusively this was not just an accident. This was a bunch of factors that, when they all come together, form the inescapable conclusion that George Pino was reckless and he was culpably negligent, and as a result, Lucy's gone. And that's why at the end of this trial, I will ask you to return a verdict of guilty.
Maybe approach the motion before I start opening.
Sidebar. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just remind you that the state has the burden of proving each and every element of the crimes that are charged. The defense has no burden whatsoever to prove or disprove anything or present any evidence whatsoever. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Can everybody hear me okay? Is the microphone working, Your Honor?
I think it is.
I think we all agree that we're here today because there was a tragedy. Lucy died. And it's painful. It's painful for everybody to think about it, hear about it, talk about it. And over the course of the trial, we'll have to relive those moments. And George Pino is going to have to relive those moments. He loved Lucy. He'd known Lucy since she was a little girl. He loved Lucy like a daughter, like his own daughter. The state admits this was not George's intention for this to happen. He did not intend to crash into a marker. He did not intend for anybody to be hurt. His own daughter, his own wife, his own body was on that boat. He had traveled on that boat safely through that channel many, many times. Many times. And he was celebrating his daughter's 18th birthday with some of the best friends his daughter had since childhood. These were generational friendships. George's parents' generation, George's generation, and then the next generation. George would never think to put any of these girls' lives in jeopardy. And when he was traveling at 47 miles per hour, with everybody seated on that boat, with George at the helm, a perfectly clear day, the seas were calm. A boat like that could have been powered not with just 600 horsepower engines, but 700 horsepower engines, although George didn't put the maximum horsepower engines on that boat. That boat can travel at upwards of 50 plus miles an hour, fully loaded. There was no weight restriction or personal restriction that George was violating when he had all of his passengers on the boat. There was a life preserver for each and every one of them on board, although the law doesn't require that passengers on a boat wear the life preserver. There was no speed limit in the channel. And there are channels with speed limits. When you come back to port, you might see a sign that says, no wake. Wake, W-A-K-E. Boats have to travel slowly when coming back into port sometimes. There might be a marker that says minimum wake. And there are markers that have speed limits throughout the intracoastal waterway. But Cutter Bank Channel in 2022 had no posted speed limits. We are now in 2026. There are still no posted speed limits at Cutter Bank Channel, even after this tragedy happened. Our legislature has not imposed.
Objection, argument sustained.
There was none then. There is none now, because under ordinary circumstances, traveling at 47 miles per hour, which George Pino had done many times, is not a violation of the law. It is not unsafe seamanship. Still, George crashed. The state's theory, as you've heard it today, is a bit of a mishmash. On the one hand, they say to you 2 beers, trying to suggest to you this is about alcohol impairment. The state knows better than that.
Objection, argument.
The evidence will show.
What the evidence will show. Thank you, counsel.
I apologize. Multiple eyewitnesses, at least 8, I expect, will testify at this trial. 8 who observed George Pino at the sandbar just after the collision, the crash, and law enforcement officers themselves who observed George Pino eye to eye, examining him purposely to determine, was George Pino impaired? Each of those witnesses who examined and observed George Pino were satisfied that George Pino was not impaired. That included the adults that were at the sandbar. It included Lucy's dad, who was at the sandbar, himself enjoying the festivities with his daughter, with the Pinos, and with the other families that were there. And the adults that were at the sandbar were also consuming some alcohol. They too operated their motor vessels after consuming some alcohol, including Lucy's dad. Lucy's dad would never have allowed his daughter to ride back with George Pino if Lucy's dad thought that George Pino was impaired. And Lucy's dad saw that George Pino had had a beer and was satisfied that George Pino was not impaired. This was not the first time George Pino had had a beer in his life. So you'll hear testimony from the adults at the sandbar, including George Pino's wife. George Pino's wife was on that boat. She would not have allowed her husband to operate a boat with her own life, her daughter's life, and the lives of the girls that Mrs. Pino had helped raise. Some of these girls grew up in the Pino home all the time, spending time together. Mrs. Pino will testify. George, her husband, was not impaired. She wouldn't have risked her own life.
Excuse me. Does it come side by side? Thank you.
Your Honor, I apologize to counsel. I have no intention of trying to interrupt his opening statement, but the defendant's emotional outburst became unavoidably distracting and wholly improper for a jury to view. Okay, I know it's not counsel's fault.
We're going to take a few minutes break. Mr. Pino, you need to get a hold of yourself and be able to manage your emotions during these proceedings. So whatever you need to do that is going to be necessary. Take a few minutes now. We'll take 10 minutes. Discuss how that can be accomplished, because we are going to proceed, and Mr. Pino is going to need to be able to control his hand. 10 minutes, thank you. Fill out this form.
Sorry, that's it.